When we think about the end of the Vietnam War, that picture that probably comes to mind is the chaotic, last-minute helicopter evacuations from Saigon back in April 1975. But here's the thing. For millions of people, that wasn't an ending. Not at all. It was actually the start of a brand new, decades-long crisis of survival and displacement. And this is the human face of what came next. The story stopped being about soldiers and politics, and it became about people. The Fall of Saigon kicked off one of the biggest refugee crises of the 20th century, an event that would completely reshape countless lives, families, and even international policy for years to come. And this number? Well, this is the staggering scale of it all. Over the next 20 years, more than 3 million people would end up fleeing Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, all just desperately searching for safety and a new place to call home. So, to really understand the refugees' journey, we have to rewind a little bit, back to the final chaotic hours of the war itself. North Vietnamese forces were closing in on the capital of South Vietnam, and the entire city was right on the brink of collapse. Now, this might sound like a simple weather report, but it was anything but. This was a secret, prearranged code. When this phrase was broadcast on Armed Forces radio, it was the signal for every remaining American and certain South Vietnamese to get to their evacuation points, and to get there now. The final exodus was officially on. And if that wasn't strange enough, the code was immediately followed by this song. Just try to imagine it. You're in tropical Saigon, the city is literally falling apart around you, and you hear Bing Crosby singing about snow. This surreal, bizarre trigger kicked off the largest helicopter evacuation in history. The official name for this mad dash was Operation Frequent Wind. It was a last-ditch effort, really, a desperate plan B that got activated only after the main airport was attacked and became totally unusable. From that moment on, the only way out was by helicopter. There were two main pickup spots: the Defense Attaché Office compound, which was out near the airport for most civilians, and then the U.S. Embassy, which was really only supposed to be for its own staff. But as panic completely took over the city, both places were just swarmed by tens of thousands of people, all desperate for a way out. And things just unraveled so fast. The shelling of the main airbase made big plane evacuations totally impossible. That left helicopters as the only hope. South Vietnamese pilots, seeing the writing on the wall, just took off in their own aircraft and flew out to sea, hoping to find American ships. Meanwhile, the embassy became this final, desperate symbol of escape for thousands. This right here is one of the most incredible stories from those last days. A South Vietnamese Air Force major named Bu Quang was flying this tiny Cessna airplane with his entire family packed inside. He couldn't find a single spot to land on the packed deck of the aircraft carrier, the USS Midway, so he circled the ship and dropped this handwritten note. In what was just an astonishing act, the ship's captain gave an order: push the helicopters overboard. So the crew pushed about $10 million worth of perfectly good Huey helicopters right into the South China Sea. All of that just to clear the deck and save one family, allowing Major Quang to land his little plane safely. And just like that, it was over. The last official American presence in Vietnam lifted off, leaving behind hundreds of Vietnamese still inside the embassy walls and thousands more in the streets outside. For them, the organized escape was finished. Their own, much more perilous journey was just about to begin. So while the military operation had ended, a massive humanitarian crisis was just getting started. For all those people left behind, the only way out was to take to the sea in basically anything that could float. This contrast, it really says it all. On one side, you have the American evacuation, military-grade helicopters, a whole naval task force. It was chaotic, for sure, but relatively organized. And on the other side, you have this: families waiting ashore from tiny, dangerously overcrowded fishing boats. This was the new reality for the vast majority who fled. And they became known to the world as the boat people. That term, it just perfectly captured the absolute desperation of their flight. They were facing storms, starvation, dehydration, literally gambling their lives on the open ocean for just a chance at freedom. And the dangers they faced, they were just horrific. These statistics from the UN Refugee Agency are just for a single year, 1981. Hundreds of boats attacked by pirates. The human cost was unimaginable, and it's estimated that tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people perished at sea. This flood of refugees arriving on the shores of neighboring countries created a whole new kind of crisis. It really put the conscience and the capacity of the entire international community to the test.
And you can see right here who bore the brunt of it. The burden fell heaviest on Vietnam's direct neighbors. Places like Malaysia, Hong Kong, and Thailand were completely overwhelmed by the sheer numbers, which led to enormous refugee camps and a lot of tension in the region.
The crisis hit a boiling point when some of these countries, feeling like they just couldn't take any more, started pushing boats full of refugees back out into international waters. This policy of pushbacks was basically a death sentence for many, and it finally forced the world to act. The breakthrough came in 1979 at a conference in Geneva. The deal was this: Southeast Asian nations would provide temporary safety, what they called first asylum, and in exchange, Western countries like the US, Canada, Australia, and France would guarantee that they would permanently resettle those refugees. It was a crucial diplomatic compromise. So this compromise led to a few key solutions that evolved over time. The Orderly Departure Program, for example, was set up so people could apply to leave Vietnam legally, so they wouldn't have to risk the dangerous sea journey. Then, a whole decade later, the Comprehensive Plan of Action introduced screening to figure out who actually qualified as a refugee, all in a desperate attempt to manage a crisis that just wouldn't end.
The Indo-Chinese refugee crisis dragged on for 2 decades, and it left behind a profound and, well, a pretty complex legacy, not just for the millions who fled, but for the whole world's approach to refugees. So what was the final outcome? Well, the vast majority, about 2.5 million people, were resettled and got to start new lives all over the globe. A smaller number, around 500,000, eventually returned home. So if you just look at the numbers, it seems like a massive humanitarian success story, but its real legacy is a lot more complicated than that.
It's really a double-edged sword. On one hand, yes, the world came together in an absolutely unprecedented way and saved millions of lives. But on the other hand, the sheer scale of the crisis and the fact that it went on for 2 decades, it led to a kind of compassion fatigue. Western nations became much more reluctant to make those kinds of large, open-ended resettlement promises again. The very programs that saved the boat people ended up marking a major turning point, a shift toward the more restrictive refugee policies we see so often today.
Which leaves us with this final, really powerful question. The story of the Fall of Saigon and the massive refugee exodus that followed, it really forces us to confront the true, long-lasting consequences of conflict and our shared responsibility for the human beings who get caught in the aftermath.